You're listening to the Rawha, Daily Guidance for Seekers with Shaykh Faraz Rabbani, who will be covering Imam Yusuf al-Nabahani's beautiful collection of 40 sets of 40 Hadiths of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, as well as Imam Zarnuji's guidance for seekers of knowledge regarding the ways of seeking knowledge, ta'lim al-Muta, Turuq al-allum.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa barak ala Sayyidina wa Nabina wa Habibina Muhammad. ذي القدر العظيم وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. Alhamdulillah. In our Daily Rawha, we're continuing to look at some of the guidance of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and from Imam Zarnuji's work on the adab of seeking knowledge. And we looked in the previous lesson at some of the keys to attaining knowledge. Right? Some of the keys to attaining knowledge. And things that facilitate it. Right? And he closes this section, rahimahullah ta'ala, by saying, لا بد لطالب العلم من تحمل المشقة والمذلة في طلب العلم. It is absolutely necessary for the seeker of knowledge from bearing burden and humiliation in seeking knowledge. Absolutely necessary. Why? Because it's a basic principle that anything precious requires effort and sacrifice to attain it. Right? That's just one of the sunnahs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in creation. Right? It applies to worldly things. You want to become a doctor, you can't just say, okay, please choose me to be the doctor. There's effort. And if you really want it, you have to prove it. Right? And the same thing applies to matters of spiritual worth, of religious worth, and from them. And here, of course, we're talking about attaining religious knowledge. And religious knowledge being more precious than anything else. The whole purpose of creation, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. I have not created jinn or humans except that they may worship me, except they may know me. And worship is not possible without knowledge. Right? The most precious meaning in existence is knowledge of Allah. And that's from knowledge. Right? So, being the most precious of things, it requires the greatest of sacrifice. Right? So that's just a given. That's a given. And then if you look at what is the substance of knowledge, the substance of knowledge is مَا جَاءَ بِهِ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهِ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ, what the Messenger of Allah صلى الله عليه وسلم has come with. And he's come with all that benefits creation in every way, with respect to every aspect of their reality. Right? So naturally, it is vast. Right? It is deep. So the attainment of it requires effort, just given what its content is. And because the final revelation is preserved, there are tools to ensure its preservation of the sciences of the Arabic language and the sciences of sound understanding and the principles related to the various subject matters of knowledge that ensure that we have objective measures of what is sound and unsound knowledge in all the various aspects of knowledge. So this requires effort to attain, because we have, religion is not by mere whim, but it is based on truth and principle. And all of this requires effort, right? But then, because knowledge is, the seeking of knowledge entails a stepping away from عالم الأسباب المعتادة, from the world of customary means, right? Your worldly and social, then what do people normally do? Normally people get a job. The first question someone's asked if they want to be a seeker of knowledge is, go get a job. Go get a real job. Okay? Right? And then, if they're not seeking knowledge full time, what do people do normally with their discretionary time? Because not everyone has to be a full-time seeker of knowledge to attain knowledge. Very possible to attain knowledge through part-time study, even a little consistently. Right? Many of the great scholars never studied full-time. Okay? The time in Damascus where the Mufti of Sham was a doctor and a surgeon. The Shaykh al-Qurra was a surgeon, and the Mufti of the Shafi'is was a surgeon. Right? And this was not uncommon. Oh, that's an exceptional circumstance at that time, but it's not uncommon that they had a profession as well, and they continued studying. In our time, Sheikh Samir al-Nas and others. So, someone who's seeking knowledge, part-time people, after work, what do? They relax, they hang out with family, they watch something on Netflix, or do this or do that. Yeah, just relax. Or you do worldly things. But someone is going off to study, they're staying home and reviewing. People think you're a bit weird. You don't do many things that other people do, because it's not entailed by trying to be an inheritor of the Prophet ﷺ. Ihris ala ma yanfa'uk, be avid for what benefit. So people will think you're a bit weird. Whether you're a dedicated seeker or you want to gain knowledge. So there's a certain humiliation in it, right? Of a certain type. But also, normally people want to affirm their self-worth. My opinion counts. I know, right? Whereas to gain any knowledge, you have to realize that, to be honest, your opinion doesn't really matter very much until you have something to say. Okay? Until you have something to say, your opinion really doesn't matter very much. Right? Until you have something to say. So you have to sort of let go of that, a certain type of sense of self-worth. Me, my opinion, I think. Of course, you have to think, but not in just pontificating, right? But then he explains what is this humiliation. وَالتَّمَلُّقُ مَذْمُومٌ إِلَّا فِي الْعِلْمِ. Abasing oneself is blameworthy except في طلب العلم, except in seeking knowledge. فإنه لا بد له من التملق للأستاذ, because it's necessary to humble oneself before one's teacher. والشركاء, and one's companions. وغيرهم. But of course, this is not to humiliate oneself or to leave one's divinely granted dignity, but that exaggerated sense of self. Well, that's what I prefer, right? And even with companions, right? Because there's each of you is a shepherd, and each of you is responsible for their flock, as the Prophet ﷺ said, كُلُّكُمْ رَاعٍ وَكُلُّكُمْ مَسْئُولٌ عَنْ رَعِيَّتِهِ. The ulama point a very interesting fact about that in shepherding is not just done by the shepherd. Within the flock, there's some sheep that shepherd other sheep, even though they're not the shepherd. Right? You'll see, some sheep will be like, they'll get the flock going in the right direction. Right? So, but you have to be patient with that. you want to sit and study, but sometimes there's a review session. So you kind of have to nudge the other person and say, I'll pick you up, I'll do this and that. Right? And sometimes you have to sort of let go of your ego. Right? So the humiliating oneself here is to leave the sense of self. I. Right? And to embrace humility. Even if you feel like, sometimes you have to one of the simplest way to get anyone to do anything is to feed them. That's basic sheepology, right? Or basic shepherding. Want someone to do something? Why don't we have lunch at this, and then we'll do this. So they may be like, yeah, I'm going to study with you, but you feed them, they'll do whatever you want, right? So, لِلِاسْتِفَادَةِ, to be able to benefit. Whereas if you say, my sense, I'm like, why do I have to feed her? Why do I have to feed him? Like, but a lot of these things, right, it requires that, to be able, why? And the intelligent person thinks by benefit. If you leave your opinion right now, right, what you prefer for the advice of the teacher, it's not because you're putting yourself down, but because you want to attain greater benefit. You want to be able to benefit more in the long term. قيل العلم عز لا ذل فيه ولا يدرك إلا بذل لا عز فيه. And this is ascribed by some to Imam Malik. العلم عز لا ذل فيه. It is said that knowledge is honor in which there is no abasement. And in that narration, ينال بذل لا عز فيه. And it's attained by abasement in which there is no honor. And the abasement that is required in knowledge is to leave your ego. Leave your ego. Right? One of the great Imams of the spiritual path, he is asked, what is the path to Allah? He said, the path to Allah is one step. Step on your ego and come. Okay? That's it. And what's the ego? It's me, myself, and I. And we asked in Shaykh, one of the great luminaries of our time, Mufti Rafi Usmani, may Allah preserve him, the Grand Mufti of Pakistan. He was visiting Jordan. We asked him for advice in seeking knowledge, and I'll send you guys the recording, just ask me, I have it on. He said there's 3 advices for the seeker of knowledge, right? One of them is this, right? And he explained what's meant by dhul. It's like by abasing, it's not self-abasement with a dash. Like you don't put yourself down, but you put your self down, your ego down. You leave aside your ego and focus on what benefits. And sometimes what benefits may entail, like sometimes, you don't like it, you don't get it, etc. As long as, of course, it is not something that is detrimental, right? It's not detrimental, right? And any sincere teacher or friend won't right? And sometimes they'll ask something just to see if you're willing. They'll ask you something that's mildly challenging, because if you can't do that, then why would you be able to do anything bigger than that, right? وقال القائل أرى لك نفسا تشتهي أن تعزها فلست تنال العزة حتى تذلها. So someone said, I see that you have a self that yearns to be honored, but you will not attain honor until you abase it, because honor is not self-honor. Honor is not the ego, like we want it, and you are not your nafs, right? But that subtlety within the human being, right, yearns for perfections, yearns for high matters. And and Habib Ali explained this so beautifully at one of the knowledge retreats, right? That initial yearning of the soul is a noble yearning. Just like the soul yearns for beauty. But what is the beauty that the soul yearns for? It's the beauty of the divine presence. It's the beauty of, of paradise. The beauty of beautiful states. Right? Of intimacy with the divine, of love, of awe, of these beautiful states. Right? And those characterized by those beautiful states. But if that beauty is not expressed through soul, or if not the soul is in the presence of the divine, or the heart which yearns for, eternal meanings, or at least the mind, which considers benefit and harm, good and bad, right? Which discerns. Right? Below the soul, the heart, the mind is what? Is whim and ego. Right? Whim and self, right? Which inclines towards desire, which it inclines towards disadvantage. Right? So that's where the lustful thought comes from, etc. Similarly, the human self has an inclination towards high matters, towards honor. But the honor of the servant is to be with their Lord. Right? To be present with Allah. Huwa ma'akum. He is with you. Right? What honor is there in a servant who's absent from from their Lord who's with them? Right? So this inclination for honor, right, which is an inclination of honor with Allah, honor in the next life, the honor of those honored by Allah. If not directed in that way, it yearns towards fleeting and fickle honor, right? Which is just inflation of self, which is whimsical honor. I want to be recognized. Why? Because that's what I want. Okay, that's whim. Or desire. Right? So he says, I see that you have a self that yearns to be honored. But you will not attain honor until you abase it. Meaning abase yourself. Because that inclination, if you're seeking honor, seek the true honor. Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. The most honored of you in the sight of Allah are those of most taqwa. Right? And taqwa is 3 levels. The least of it is leaving sin. Higher than that is to leave disadvantage. Higher yet is to leave distraction. Right? The taqwa of Islam, of Iman, and then Islam, and then Ihsan. Right? The levels of... That's honor. So in striving to attain these perfections, the seeker of knowledge has to be careful about their ego. Laterally in their human relationships, and ultimately in their relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? How does one do that? Right? So this is very important. And that's why a lot of people disadvantage themselves, right? A lot of young students, and they attain a little bit of knowledge, now they want to comment on everything. Why? Right? And it's hasty. And be careful of, that's why there's stern warning of the Prophet ﷺ anil ahdath, of the immature. That don't take knowledge from the immature. Right? And there's some things one may take from them, but big issues, and right now, and don't even read those kinds of things, right? We live in a difficult world, right? and there are difficult choices that need to be made, which are matters of, are they decisive or they're matters of they're matters of judgment, right? So a lot of young, they're kids still, like senior ulama have very difficult choices to make with numerous considerations that you might not even imagined, right? How do you navigate very complicated choices? And there's principles, and there's people of uprightness and principle. They make very difficult choices, and they may differ in those difficult choices because they're not clear-cut, absolutely right and absolutely wrong. And you don't get it, just keep quiet. If you don't get it and you want to know about it, ask, find out, right? But so don't be hasty to exercise your opinion on things you don't understand. But also be careful of these kinds of people talking about all kinds of stuff. Some recent article basically saying that Shaykh Hamza, making Shaykh Hamza sound as if he's a supporter of Donald Trump, which is absurd, right? Or that he's somehow being co-opted by, it's like, those kinds, don't even read them, right? If issues are raised, find out. And they're very difficult choices. They're very difficult choices. It's not a simple matter, right? Wallahu subhanahu wa ta'ala a'lam, right? And one of the principles, of course, with respect to that is they say, jarhul, and sometimes because they're matters of judgment that have so many consequences, they say, it's an important principle when it comes to the judgment of, in ilm al-rijal, when it comes to judging those reliable in transmitting hadith or knowledge, they say, jarhul aqrani la yultafat ilayhi. The critique of contemporaries is ignored. Why? Because they may be differing because they're very serious about the truth, right? So it's not that they have like some vendetta against each other. They're two people very serious about the truth, about what will benefit people, and they differ in judgment. So it's very natural that they could get quite upset. But we stay out of that, right? Because that has to do with them, not us. And we have to be careful about those matters. فصل في الورع في حال التعلم. Section on the importance of scrupulousness when seeking knowledge. Scrupulousness is defined, wara is a higher state than taqwa. Okay? They say the basic operational definition of taqwa, التقوى ترك المحرم. Taqwa is to leave the prohibited. الورع ترك المكروه والمشتبه. Wara is to leave the disliked and the uncertain. Right? So, in this sense, the taqwa is حال عامة يعني ما أمر به عامة المؤمنين. Taqwa is what the common believer has been commanded to. Right? Baseline taqwa. But then, if you want to be someone who's of the righteous, taqwa is, that baseline taqwa is not enough. To go from being just an upright believer, which is baseline taqwa, if you don't have that, you're not upright. To go from that to striving for righteousness, to be of the salihin. And if you're not salih, how can others follow you in seeking uprightness? How can you be an example for virtue? How can you talk about virtue when you don't have it? Which is why, just for anyone striving to be a righteous servant of Allah, okay, first step is leave the haram, but then you have to strive to have wara, right? To leave the disliked, to leave the dubious. And wara, wal-wara'u yahfadhu at-taqwa. Scrupulousness protects God consciousness, right? It gives you a protective shield because you avoid the disliked. That'll ensure that you avoid the haram. If you avoid the uncertain, then you can be sure that you'll be further away from falling into what's certainly wrong. Right? As the hadith of al-halalu bayyin wal-haramu bayyin, the lawful is clear and the unlawful is clear, makes clear. So that's the operational definition of wara. Right? To be, and underlying wara is to be careful. Right? Careful. And there's a direct relationship between wara, right, scrupulousness or caution with respect to matters of religious consequence. There's direct relationship, the ulama said, between wara and yaqeen. Right? Because wara arises from trying to have certainty, striving for certainty in pleasing Allah, and results in certainty with respect to knowledge of Allah. Right? Right? Wara is striving for certainty, right, in what will be pleasing to Allah. And it results in a state of certainty with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So it has a powerful impact on yaqeen. So he says, روى بعضهم حديثا في هذا الباب عن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم أنه قال من لم يتورع في تعلمه ابتلاه الله تعالى بأحد ثلاثة أشياء. So it's related by some of them. He indicates that this is not necessarily established from the Messenger of Allah صلى الله عليه وسلم, that he said, whoever is not scrupulous, right, doesn't have wara in their seeking of knowledge, Allah will try them. Allah Most High will try them with respect to three things. إما أن يميته في نسأل الله العافية إما أن يميته في شبابه, either that they die young, أو يوقعه في الرساتيق, or cause them to stumble into the villages. Right? To be stuck in the villages. Why? Because the villages, there's no one to learn from. So you gain knowledge, but you're not scrupulous, you'll end up where you can't benefit people. Okay? You're in the boonies, like this. أو يبتليه بخدمة السلطان, or you'll be tried by serving the rulers. Okay? And of that, of course, in our times, is those who join Islam Inc. Right? Who engage, who basically, what are you doing? Right? You're just running from consulting contract to consulting contract, not on the basis of consideration of need or benefit, but just you're making a buck. Right? So you have the capacity to benefit the Muslim community, to benefit humanity in very testing times. Instead, what are you doing? You're running around, just making a buck, and very often from people who have ulterior motives. Right? Who was behind many of these uprisings and so on? Who had funded them? Right? And a lot of large corporations are funding that's not innocent. There's just 1 or 2 degrees of separation from very detrimental forces, whether it be governments or think tanks that have no concern with, or are at enmity with what is ultimately the interests of not only the Muslim community but of humanity as a whole. Right? So you're a pawn in a game that you have, you're being played basically, right? And this arises from lack of caution during learning, because that will become your temperament. And when they're easy choices in the beginning, ultimately, avoid hanging out in dubious places, avoid conduct that is dubious, avoid company that's dubious. They're not difficult life choices, right? But if you don't make those easy, cautious choices during study, when you come to difficult life choices, right, that you get a big employment offer, you could make lots of money doing something ultimately meaningless, or you could do something meaningful, but you won't have much material means. You didn't make the easy, difficult choices. Then how will you make the difficult choices? right? And you'll end up somewhere, like what he says, أو يقعه في الرساتيق, or you'll get stuck in the villages, in places where you're far from any ability to benefit. Right? And this applies not just to students and all, but a lot of activists. Why do some activists disappear? They say, because don't investigate other people, but always follow the money. What are they doing? Why are they no longer like, they're doing a lot of benefit before? Now they're just following the money. Right? And that's very, very dangerous. نسأل الله العافية. So he says, فَمَهْمَا كَانَ طَالِبُ الْعِلْمِ أَوْرَعَ كَانَ عِلْمُهُ أَنْفَعَ. So to the extent that the seeker, and this one should take this as a principle, فَمَهْمَا كَانَ طَالِبُ الْعِلْمِ أَوْرَعَ كَانَ عِلْمُهُ أَنْفَعَ. So to the extent that the seeker of knowledge is scrupulous, will their knowledge be of more benefit. وَالتَّعَلُّمُ لَهُ أَيْسَرُ. And seeking knowledge for them will be easier. وَفَوَائِدُهُ أَكْثَرُ. And their benefits are greater. Right? And then he'll mention what are aspects of scrupulousness. But one of the mashayikh, in many Muslim countries, there's bad standards when it comes to public money. One of the mashayikh, he would deliberately, and he'd make it a point also to teach other people. He'd go to his office, Mufti Rafi Usmani, may Allah protect him. He'd go to his office and he'd mention that these are my own pens. He would not use the stationery, not even the paper of the madrasa to answer personal questions sent to him. Right? Because there's questions sent to him, sent officially to the madrasa through their Dar al-Ifta or through official correspondence. Any official correspondence or official work, he would use the resources of the madrasa. Anything outside of that, even if it's religious, you could say, well, this is also from the interests of the thing. He would not. He would use his own pen and he'd bring his own paper. Even though if you asked anyone, do you mind if I answer religious questions based on, they'd laugh, right? But it's scrupulousness, right? It's scrupulousness to be careful with respect to rights and responsibilities, right? This is an amana. And that's the state of the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ plucked out food from one of the children in his household because he had a reasonable doubt. He didn't know, could this have been from the charity money? Right? And this quality was instilled in the prophetic household. Right? دَعْ مَا يَرِيبُكَ إِلَى مَا لَا يَرِيبُكَ. Leave all that would make you doubt for all that would not make you doubt. Right? And then he mentioned some of the aspects of scrupulousness that the seeker of knowledge needs to uphold. That's a very valuable lesson which we'll look at next time. بإذن الله تعالى وبعون الفتاح. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.
Thank you for listening to the Rawha, Daily Guidance for Seekers with Shaykh Faraz Rabbani. Help Seekers Hub give light to millions around the world by supporting us through monthly donations by going to seekershub.org/donate. Your donations are tax deductible in the US and Canada.